Okay, so this is the R video component of Factorial Nova. So first things first, I kind of want to recap what I did in the last video that essentially introduced Factorial Nova. So Factorial Nova isn't that much different from a regular ANOVA. Um, Specifically, the only thing that is different is the inclusion of a second predictive variable. So not much different, really. So just to kind of recap really quickly, factorial ANOVAs is an analysis of variance that includes two predictive variables. Your predictive variables must be categorical, so they must have two or more levels, depending on what you want to do. If you want to be that complicated, you'd want to use factorial ANOVAs whenever you're trying to test an interaction effect between two predictive variables. You can also test the main effect as well. So basically, as far as the research that I'm using, very quick disclaimer, I am using fake data, so this is not real. Just to throw that out there. So I don't want anybody saying, oh, she found this in this video. No. So the data that I'm using is essentially gender and academic rank, so being full-time professor, associate professor, assistant professor, and how that possibly has an effect on salary. So the questions that I want to ask, well, I have three questions. If gender has an effect on salary, if rank has an effect on salary, or if there are no main effects, if there's an interaction between gender and rank and how that affects salary. So let's get started. So the first things first, I'm going to load up my data. I'm loading up my library read, importing my data set and attaching it. So you see that it came up with the view. These commands let me load up my library, so I'm going to be loading up library car, compute s, effects, ggplot2, multicomp, pass text, reshape, wrs, and hmisc. Yeah, I'm going to call it that. I'm sticking to it. So the next thing that we're going to do, we're going to set gender to a categorical factor. So this is going to tell R to treat it as a categorical factor. This is to tell R my ID numbers if I ever want to be specific. This command also sets rank to be a categorical factor, so R will treat it as such. Okay. Now, as far as the statistic descriptives, we're not really interested in each of the descriptive stats for gender or rank exclusively. I mean, it's interesting to look at if you want, but hey, it's on you. But the main thing that we're really interested is an interaction. So here, this is the command that gives me that it takes into consideration interaction, so it just throws that in there. So we're going to run that. Okay, so here we get all the different pairings. So we get male assistant professor, male associate professor, full professor for males, female assistant professor, female associate professor, and female full professor. So some things to know here, and just to really quickly about this, as far as the mean for assistant male, notice how it's kind of high up here, which is, it's supposed to be. Well, it'll make sense when I start plotting the graph. But just notice how these numbers kind of fluctuate for males. So, assistant professor, you have a mean salary of $179,000. I don't know. Basically, it's a very good salary. But then you see a decrease. But then whenever you get to full professor, you see a sharp increase too. So that's kind of interesting. Now for women, And you start here, and then you increase as well. So that's kind of interesting. But we don't know yet. This is just face value. So the next thing we're going to do, we're going to plot a box plot just to get a very descriptiveness of the data, kind of get a feel of what we're talking about here. So here you can see for males the spreads vary for each data set, well, for each group. So for men, there's a wider spread here, but then we get to associate, there's a wider spread here too, and it actually increases for the full professor. So that's kind of interesting to note. So it's kind of like you get paid more as an assistant professor, but then you get to become associate. You kind of see like a decrease here, so the spread isn't as much. But then you get here, it widens out. There's not much difference when you're looking at female and rank. Not much different, kind of. So essentially, you see the spread get wider as you go with the rank, which is kind of interesting. So just to think that it's possible that rank can be, or gender essentially can be influential of salary. So now this command is going to let me plot a line graph to get a little bit better sense of what our data is telling us already, if it comes up. So just really quickly here, just from right here you can tell like there really isn't an interaction between gender and rank. Non-parallel lines mean there's an interaction. So essentially our lines are like completely parallel. So there is no interaction between rank and gender. But essentially it appears that gender has an effect on salary. If you look here, the males, so as far as an assistant goes, you decrease in your salary with your rank as you go up in your ranks. Or is it the other way around? I'll clarify that a little bit after. So, but either way, as you go up to full-time professor, you get more money for the males. And essentially we're seeing the same thing here for females. However, yeah. So for female, so as you go from assistant to associate to full professor as a female, as a woman, let's say that. I don't like saying female. You get more money. So this kind of can be an indication that gender has something to do with salary. But we don't know yet. This is just my face value. So now we're going to test our assumptions. So once again, the assumptions for factorial ANOVA are the same as a one-way ANOVA. So homogeneity variance, normally distributed data, and what else did we do? Yeah, I got it all right. And also linearity and homoscedasticity. And that's something that we're going to do. We're going to test whenever we do the line graphs. And actually, I'm just curious. There actually is another I know it says ANCOVA, but this is actually a factorial ANOVA assignment. An independence between observations. So yes. Alright. So the first thing that we're going to do, we're going to test for homogeneity of variance. Even though we're actually interested in the interaction, I just want to run through each group. God darn it. So as you can see here, the variance between these groups are completely different, or significantly different. Reason being, these groups aren't actually equal. The data set, there's more men than there are female. There's more men than there are women in the data set. So that possibly that more than likely has an effect on why we're seeing something like this. But let's keep moving. Again. Oh, this sucks. So basically here, rank is significantly within ranks, the variance between the groups, the ranking groups, are significantly different from one another. So that's terrible. But let's keep moving. Oh no, all hope is lost. Okay, so with this is essentially basically between each groups the variants are different. So that sucks. So essentially we can't really trust our assumptions. But one thing I kind of want to say is interesting is if we did, there is actually a way that we can run a one-way test ANOVA if our assumptions of homogeneity, of variance aren't met. So here's this nice little command here. So essentially, even though we're assuming that we don't have equal variances, as far as ANOVA is concerned, there would be an effect from the interaction, and we would know because it's significant. But moving along, this is something that I just kind of wanted to show really quickly. So yeah. So as far as assumptions go, well, with homogeneity of variance, we can't really trust it. That sucks. But we're going to keep moving, and we're going to test them along the way. The other assumptions along the way. So the first thing, if we want to try to do factorial ANOVA, we have to set up the model. So essentially, this command allows us to set up the bones of what we want to do. So we're going to run that. And then for ANOVA, if we just want to do a type 1, we can. So I did. I'm going to run an ANOVA. Oh, darn it. Okay, so basically here, you're not seeing a significant effects for rank or the interaction of gender and rank, but only for gender. So this means that gender has a main effect on salary, whereas rank doesn't have a main effect, nor does an interaction effect exist between the two, and that doesn't have an effect on salary. So that's kind of interesting. And if we wanted to do a type 3 sum of squares, this is the command that we do to do it. We would get like an extra line here, but that's besides the point. Now, since I didn't have a specific hypothesis, I'm going to run a post hoc analysis. So I'm going to run this for rank. Okay. So here we see that assistant, as far as full professor and assistants goes, there is a significant difference between the two. So that's kind of cool. And then we're going to run it for gender. Whoa. Okay. So basically, as far as female and male, they are significantly different from one another. Still a disclaimer, it can be due to the fact that both of them are unequal in their groups. So you might be seeing a difference because of the fact that there's not a lot of equal, like there's not enough, they don't have the same number of participants. So yeah. So post hocs. So we get this, and it's saying it may be inappropriate, but we're gonna do it anyway. So really, we're not seeing a big difference in any of these groups when you consider interaction. But it's cool because it doesn't really matter it doesn't really matter that we have a post hoc test. Well, it does matter, but as far as interaction goes, this doesn't really matter. So yeah. Yep. So now if we did have a hypothesis, then we would do a planned contrast and we would see all the different effects. And these are the different commands for it. So